What's up, CSL? Welcome back. We're carrying on our conference previews today, looking at the Eastern Conference. And today I'm joined by two different general managers. Obviously, we had two Western Conference GMs last time. It's only fair we have two Eastern Conference GMs this time. First up, we've got the usual regular to the show, Gary from Washington. Gary, how's it going for you? Top of your division, I see at the moment.
Yeah, finally, for once in my life, I'm top of the division. But yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for letting me join in.
No problem. I think it's because you've decided to go away from an all point guard lineup. It's probably been the main thing there. But yeah, well, good to have you back on. And we're joined by a newcomer to the show, a regular in CSL, but new to here. Josh from Cleveland, the Cavaliers, having a bit of a rough start to begin the season, but I'm sure you're looking to get back up the top in the Central Division.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That kind of seems to be my team's MO. We have a rough first month of the season. I finally get tired of trying to come up with new things, and I put in my playoff strategies, and we take off from there. So I just did that, and hopefully it's going to work for this season too.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I obviously did your season preview, and I had you guys penciled in as one of the favourites in the East, but I'm sure we'll talk about Cleveland a little bit more as we get to the Central Division. But first of all, I want to kick off with the division in the Eastern Conference that you guys aren't in. Probably one of the interesting ones this year, the Atlantic Division. We can kind of see at the moment that the Celtics are at the top, 76ers, the Raptors, who are GM-less at the moment, and then the Nets and the Knicks. I mean, Gary, who do you kind of see coming out on top here in the Atlantic this year?
Well, originally I thought, Raptors have a GM, it's going to be them, but since they don't really have a GM, Miles is just kind of setting depth charts for them. Actually, my dark horse was the 76ers.
Why the 76ers?
This is because they have accumulated a lot of talent from all those underachieving years. You got guys like Lonzo Ball. You got one of the top scorers in the league, Jabari Parker. And then they re-signed some of the crucial pieces like six-man Jabari Brown. And then the young guys are developing too, like Echuan Moore, Festus Ezeli. All those guys are pretty solid role players that surrounds well with Jabari Parker. And they also got Adrian Payne back from the season-ending injury from last season. And I always like him as a big man. I feel like he's very versatile and does a little bit of everything. And just seems like a good mix. As long as there's a GM that kind of running things, they should do well.
Yeah, I mean, Josh, what's your view on the 76ers? I mean, did you have the Raptors penciled in at the top and the 76ers kind of close behind?
No, actually, I kind of saw what's happening with the Raptors coming. They had some regression to their players. They seem to be a very perimeter-oriented team, and a lot of their guys actually regressed in their ratings a little bit this year. So I kind of was thinking that even if Jinky didn't leave, he was going to have to play around with his roster a little bit. I felt like this is going to be our time to overtake them, which hasn't really happened yet. My team is actually the same as Gary's, because I really think that Philadelphia has been underachieving the past few seasons. And if there's one thing in this league that kind of just makes you elite and can almost make you sleepwalk through the regular season, is having a point guard who has at least two elite skills. And Lonzo seems to come into the season with at least three elite skills. So that was going to have a very galvanizing effect on their team. I feel like Boston could actually win the division if it is actually prepared to try to win the division. So.
Yeah, I mean, for me, looking at the 76ers, this is a team that it really frustrates me as a GM in the Western Conference and kind of seeing Detroit dominate the Eastern Conference for a couple of years. And you've got teams like the 76ers who haven't been as well managed as probably some of the other teams. And I mean, you guys mentioned it, Lonzo Ball, but Gary, do you think that Lonzo's been the main difference maker for them this season?
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, when you have a big-time scorer like Jabari Parker who can single-handedly win you the game offense, when you need somebody who can play defense and dish him good looks on offense, and that's exactly what Lonzo Ball is doing. He's averaging almost 9 assists per game, and he's one of the top leaders in steals as well. and he's actually doing decently shooting-wise compared to what the scouting report indicates. So I think he's been a big factor. Like Josh said, any good team that comes out in the playoffs got to have some solid, or at least good point guard play, and Lonzo's been doing that for them. So.
Yeah, and if you look at all the teams that have those elite point guards, every team that I could think of that has one of those elite ball thieves with a rating of 80 or higher at the point guard position, all of them are winning teams. Like all of them make the playoffs. That's a skill that is still somewhat lacking in the league. And I'm glad these past few drafts have been somewhat loaded with young point guards that have high defensive ratings, because I think that's something that you just really need in the to help you at that next level.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, me personally, I didn't have the 76ers penciled in as winning the division because I kind of didn't expect them to run some plays and strategies and run a sub matrix that was actually relevant. So I kind of expected them to be a bottom 6 team again, just for that factor. But the scary thing is they've obviously got Roy Hibbert possibly coming back in about a month or so. So that's certainly going to help them as well. But moving on to the other team that you guys mentioned, the Toronto Raptors. Josh, you kind of mentioned that you felt, some of the guys have regressed, and, this may have been the season that Cleveland finally get above the Raptors in the pecking order. Was it just due to the GM leaving, or is it due to the personnel as well? Or, where do you see Toronto fitting now in that division?
I think it's really because of the personnel. I think that he built the roster that's so strong that honestly, even without here to GM it will still make the playoffs. But I noticed the past few seasons, because I'm the team that he's matched up with each year. It seems like that it's been perimeter play when I could actually control. I can account for Kawhi and I can account for his bigs. He couldn't stop me there. And his threes, and he could run around every cabin. Right? There was just no match for that. The other matchup I have for that was Kyrie. So he accounted for Kyrie. I was kind of stuck at that point.
Yeah, lots of sort of some comments there on obviously the general manager sort of leaving, and the personnel's probably still being good enough for the playoffs, but probably need a human GM to kind of lead them to get back up into the top of the division. Gary, do you agree with that, or do you kind of expect Toronto to get a slightly better record than they are at the moment, sitting at 9-6?
I think that they definitely need a active GM with them, because Miles can't take care of three teams at all times. All three inactive teams. And if you look at their team information, their statistics breakdown as a team, they still have a really good point differential. They're one of the least turnovers team in the league. They're still playing the similar brand of ball that they were playing last year, but just like Josh said, some of the older guys like Thad Young, Lance Stevenson, and Jeremy Lin have regressed a lot because due to age. So they're definitely running out of time. I do like that new kid Jordan Bell, but he's still really young, and I think it needs preference work, which is something he's not really getting with an inactive GM. So that could be a problem.
Yeah, and he's an endurance leap away from actually seeing his full impact. Jordan Bell's going to be a beast when he actually gets above 90 in endurance.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah, so I think we kind of agree. We kind of see them being a playoff team, possibly not taking the division because they don't have that human general manager, and probably still going to be a playoff team whilst they have that roster intact. So just moving on to the other sort of team that is probably at the top of this division, the Boston Celtics. Josh, you kind of made a comment earlier when we were talking about the top teams and saying that if the Celtics actually tried, they should win this division. And the dog obviously agrees with us on that. But is that kind of your thoughts? Do you think this is a team that's underachieving at 11-4?
Yeah, their GM openly admits that he's not running hard strategies. If you go and look, he's running like 1-1-5-1, and he has a team where he could be running the Sun style. He could be balls to the wall defense from the opening tips at the end of the game because he has the guys to run that sort of team, and he's just more concerned with developing his talent, seeing what their ceiling is, and making sure no one gets injured. Which is also a very strong strategy. I'm trying to walk the middle road right now of keeping all of my guys under 34 minutes, but trying to win games as well. So I understand where he's coming from. Then that injuries are just horrible in this game, so you have to watch out for them. But I honestly feel that if he really wanted to win his division, that he would win it. Like he has, wanted to say, a lottery pick, or if not a close to lottery pick, 1 through 5 in his starting lineup, and then 5 through 10 in his bench. So
yeah, I mean, Gary, do you kind of agree with that? Do you think that this team, should be up there in the division, or still too young?
They're a young team, but they have a good mix of veterans as well, like guys like Ben McLemore and Aaron Gordon. Those guys have enough endurance ratings right now to play a long minutes. And then they have a really deep team if you look at them. They're a good mix of guys that can play defense and offense. And they also signed some, old veterans like T.J. Warren, John Henson, and Shabazz Napier. I mean, you look at this whole roster, they're literally almost 15 deep. So they can wear you out by just throwing a bunch of guys at you. I mean, yeah, the team is still really young, but Dennis always does a pretty good job of maximizing his guys. But right now, I think it's more of a development mode, so he's not really going as hard as he can, I suppose. That's what the word you can say. So, but I still think that Boston should be able to win this division if Dennis continues to, plays his big guns.
Yeah, I completely agree. Dennis said 70% is still shown to be more than a GM than TJ is. So,
yep.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the Celtics. I rib him a lot on the chat that we have for the league, but I mean, yeah, I'll be honest. Dennis has done a good job with this team. I mean, he's obviously knocked it down, rebuilt it back up, and there's players in there that should become some of the best players in their position when they develop. I mean, 11-4 is not a surprise. My only concern is that he has a lot of young talent, and he needs to very quickly find out which ones he wants to, keep at the top and give minutes to, and really use them as the core, and which ones are either rotation pieces or pieces he can trade whilst they still have value. But yeah, I'm not surprised that the Celtics are in the top half of the Atlantic Division early on.
I really think that if he'd gone after Damian Lillard and signed him, that this would be the prohibitive championship team right now.
It's definitely possible. I mean, that team is so deep with somebody, a big gun, that's, possibly franchise player, and Damian Lillard. Yeah, it probably can take them to the next level for sure.
I think people get one superstar on that roster because, I mean, we play the game to win. And I look at his team, and it's, frankly, a little frustrating to me because I'm like, man, I wish I'd had all of those top picks to build a roster like that because he literally has the assets to go out and get a superstar right now and just go for it. To each their own. Yeah,
absolutely. And we'll come and talk about a team later on, the Miami Heat, who have gone a very similar way, but a slightly different style, and we'll see how they're getting on. But the other two teams in this Atlantic Division, the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Knicks, I mean, we'll talk about the Knicks later on in lottery teams, and I don't know if you guys can see them ever get into the playoffs this year, but the Nets, for me, are probably a team that are kind of underachieving at the moment. I mean, do you think that there's been some rumours that John Wall might possibly be traded soon, but do you think that the Nets still have a chance at the playoffs?
Yeah, I think that they're suffering from lack of identity. I think that they don't have a specific type. We're going to go out there and this is the type of game we're going to try to play, and this is what wins us games. And I think Wizard will find it eventually. I don't think that trading on Wall necessarily would do that for him. I hope that if he does do it, he gets a good return on it. But I think that he has to definitely have a team that performs better than it is right now.
Yeah, and I mean, they can go two ways, can't they, Gary? I mean, they can either keep John Wall and try and get into the playoffs and possibly have the personnel to do it, or if they trade John Wall, I mean, anything's open there. But based on the current roster, what's your take on it?
It just seems like the guys are not fitting. You look at like the guys, the big guns, like John Wall himself. He's shooting a career low 42% right now, and then Dion Waiters shooting 39% with 34% 3-point percentage. I mean, compared to last season, all these guys were shooting really good percentages, and then one of the most improved of the year candidate, Miles Turner, is actually struggling as well, shooting 44%. This seems like the whole team is in a shooting funk and lacks some sort of a direction. Maybe losing Jake Layman is actually a big factor to this weird lineup. I'm not sure. But it seems like losing guys like Jake Layman, JaVale McGee, and this team has dropped off a lot in the overall play. Which you wouldn't think so when you hear the names, but sometimes this is how this DDS game works. Is some certain guys actually does really big things for you that you can't see statistics-wise. And I don't know. I think Adams needs to make a decision soon on what he wants to do because John Wall isn't exactly young himself. After next season, he's going to start getting those regression ratings. So, yeah, he's going to make a decision. He wants to win now or deal Wall and look for the future.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'll throw two questions at you guys, and you can kind of answer them in order. But first one I'll throw at you. Do the Brooklyn Nets trade John Wall this season?
Go ahead, Josh. Okay, I'll go. I guess for now, I would say that stay put. I mean, they're still 6-8 right now. It's only, 14 games. Still a pretty small sample size. But Adam really needs to figure out a strategy pretty soon. And I'd say that once by, around All-Star break trade deadline, this team's still struggling under 500. That's when the time you throw John Wall up there and start trying to trade him for younger pieces. But right now, I think you need to stick with it because the division is deep. But nobody has that, franchise guy like John Wall does. So,
Josh, do you think the Nets will trade Wall?
I hope he doesn't because I don't think that's a problem. Cut out just for the audience. I'm driving through rural Georgia right now on vacation with my wife, so I'm in areas of extreme country where there's probably just not a cell tower inside. They may not have even heard of cell phones, so I apologize.
Dedication.
I honestly feel like Miles Turner is actually the problem on the team. I think that Rizzo has convinced himself that Miles Turner is a good post player, and I think that he isn't. I think that he just happens to put up good numbers.
Yeah, I mean, he's still young. He still might have some preference work. So, and then the other question I want to ask you too, just quickly before we go on to the Knicks and then quickly onto the Central Division.
Because I mean, he needs more there, and I feel like he.
So my final question for you guys on the Nets: will they make the playoffs?
I think they will. I think that when it all shakes down, some of the other teams fall back down to.
Yeah.
For now, I would say that they're probably gonna make it as the 8th seed because Pacers are struggling themselves. There's another team that slotted us. I think it's 7th or 8th seed. I think they can beat them because they have John Wall, while Pacers lost Winslow for the year. And I don't think the Hawks gonna sustain that kind of play. Honestly, I just think it's a weird mix. And I think the Nets will make the playoffs.
Okay, and then the final team in the Atlantic Division, the New York Knicks, who are for some reason going into a rebuild with no picks for this year. But anything you guys want to quickly say on them before we probably cover them in a later section?
That team is a mess right now. I mean, I don't even know what to say. I think the only legitimate pieces they got maybe James Hill.
Straight up, profit guys.
So there's not a lot to say. We'll come back to them later. So let's move on to the Central Division. Obviously, business as usual for Detroit Pistons at the moment at the top of the division. Had a bit of a retool this offseason. Still have Kemba Walker leading them as the franchise man. Can anyone upset them in the Central this year? Or is it, are the Pistons still light years ahead of some of these teams?
It's interesting because this year John's supposed to be taking a step back of retooling his roster and go a little bit younger. Kind of like the Phoenix approach of, take one step back and go 2 steps forward in the future. But for some reason, this team is still gelling really well. You look at the point differential; it's it's about 11 points positive right now, and they're averaging 10 steals a game. They're just playing good basketball, shooting 40% from the three, 48% as a team in general. I mean, this team is deep, arguably one of the best big man rotation in the league, depth-wise. It's going to be tough to overcome them, especially if they got off such a hot start. Originally, I had the Cavaliers winning the division, but the Cavs kind of got stuck with, Josh having some dealing with personal issues, and then they also play a lot of road games so far. I think the Cavs going to become the second place division team, but Pistons going to win the division this year. John just knows how to maximize his guys. Period.
Josh, is that something that you agree with being in the division, or do you feel you guys can get close to the Pistons this year?
Oh, Georgia got him.
I'm guessing the signal's gone out there, but okay, cool. So let's.
There he is.
Yeah. So you're back. So we just asking you the question. Really, we're talking about the Detroit Pistons and being ahead of the Central Division early on. Do you think that yourself and the Cavaliers can compete with the Pistons this year for that division title, or are the Pistons still ahead of everyone?
I think the playoffs are a different beast because he and I both understand matchups, and I can, put the players where I need them to be to try to sneak a win or, use a strategy to catch them off guard and sneak a game here or there. I think that the thing is that it's the Kemba effect. Kemba is my early league, one of those point guards with over an 80 rating and still feel like that's a game changer in this engine.
So I think what you kind of I think what you're saying there is essentially Pistons will probably still be ahead in the Central Division, but come playoff time it might be a different matter. So looking at the other teams across the division, I mean you've got 3 teams there I would say should be in the playoff hunt this year: the Chicago Bulls, the Indiana Pacers, and of course the Cleveland Cavaliers. Let's leave the Cavaliers till last, and we'll get Josh's view on that. But we'll just run in order really at the moment. So Chicago Bulls obviously have had a really dramatic offseason and a whole host of changes, going from a team that was probably bottom 5 to a team that has new personnel and are looking at playoffs. What's your take on it, Gary? Do you think the Bulls are legitimate after an 8-7 start, or do you think that they're still borderline playoffs?
I think that right now their goal is going to try to make the playoffs. I know Marcus early in the season went a little bit inactive due to some issues, but he's back now. And once he got back, the team's been playing a lot better, it seems. This team has pretty good, solid mix of talent with a lot of good 3-and-D guys to surround Lauri Markkanen. But the problem is that the big guys like Lauri Markkanen doesn't have the endurance to play big minutes yet. And that veteran, the rookie point guard who's pretty much a veteran, Guler, I believe this is how you pronounce his name. He's been doing okay. He's passing the ball really well, but he's not really shooting the ball that well. Chris Middleton seems to be been in a funk since he left Memphis. I mean, he's still shooting solid percentages, but this guy's supposed to be more of a 50% field goal percentage, 40% three kind of guy, but he's not really doing that. It just seems like he's kind of more of a third-tier player right now. Their leading scorer is actually Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, which, I don't know if that's a good thing. So I think this team's still young and lacks some pieces, but I think they should be fighting for the 7th or 8th spot.
And Josh, what's your take on the Chicago Bulls?
One of those teams that I think this is one of those teams that's just going to have internal development that's going to get them to the next level. They're waiting on Markkanen to reach this level, and I feel like it's what his appropriate role is, which is the second best player or the third best player on a championship team. And Julier was, or however you pronounce it, that was a great pick up at point guard. And the most important in this league. That's why I will never trade Kyrie. You don't have a point guard, you're not winning.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you guys kind of got it spot on in terms of what I think as well. So when I look at this team, they've got depth, they've got talent, they've got obviously a rookie point guard who might need some preference work to iron out some of that shooting issue. But they're really kind of sitting there and waiting for the 2 years for Lauri Markkanen to develop. And as soon as he develops, I mean, we've seen it in the Western Conference with Porzingis this year. And as soon as you get a post guy who has that kind of scoring talent, who'll put up 25 to 30 points a game, it can be deadly. And arguably, you could say that if this Bulls team stays together, that's probably a better team than the Utah team at the moment. So we'll see how it develops. So let's talk about the other team that's sort of hanging around at 0.500 at the moment, the Indiana Pacers, a team that have really had a dramatic change in style over the past year or so since Higrad has taken over. They've obviously had a disastrous injury to Justice Winslow at the beginning of the season. But, I mean, Josh, do you think the Pacers are a definitive lock for the playoffs this year?
Man, I've been in leagues with high grade for a very long time, and I have the hardest time playing these teams because he has the hardest time sticking to what seems like a plan to me. And I feel like last year when he and I made our trade and he went the all defense route, I kind of concede what I thought he was trying to do. And I feel like he's even hedged away from that again. I feel like once he just firmly picks a plan, then we'll be able to predict some success. I'm kind of everywhere on
Indiana. I mean, Gary, do you kind of sense that as well, or what are your thoughts with the Pacers?
Yeah, I played with high grade in field leagues before back in the day as well. High grade teams either do really well or they just kind of collapse. So it's hard to tell. Yep. It's very bipolar, I would say. I guess because high grade's kind of like on and off himself, activity wise. When he's winning, he's very active, but then when things kind of go south, he kind of disappears. Hopefully that's not the case here. But I think the biggest problem with this team right now is that offensively, for myself, I think they're very easy to game plan. I can throw maybe on these one or two defenders, I can lock the whole team up. And the three-point shooting is kind of deceiving right now because none of the guys that are hitting the threes are big volume shooters. So like last game, I just ran a zone on them and it worked perfectly well. I think they're a pretty easy team to game plan, to one-dimensional offense. Defensively, they're tough, but then again, they foul a lot. I mean, you look at their fouls per game by their players. Like Draymond Green's average about 5 fouls a game. Winslow, before I got hurt, was almost 4 a game. And then you got guys like Oladipo and McGee to average about 3 fouls a game. That's a lot of free throws giving up. And we all know the best teams in the league, like Phoenix and Detroit and Sacramento, those guys draw a ton of fouls, and they take advantage of that. And I think that's the biggest problem right now is that they're easy to game plan and they foul a lot. It's hard to win games when you give up like 30, 40 free throws a game.
Yeah, I mean, a while back he actually made some, we don't talk about trades a lot, but he made some inquiries into Blake's availability. And, I didn't even, want one of those old packages. And I told him, I was like, that's the type of player you're one step away. When you have those rosters that are filled with defenders from 1 through 9, you only really need one offensive hub for your winning team, but he can't pry himself away from some of these star names in this roster, and I think that's to his detriment.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing, I just was looking whilst you guys were having a chat, the points allowed per game is obviously not great at the moment, probably because of the fouls, as you mentioned, Gary, but I think Justice Winslow going down has really hurt them because he was by far their best defender, and the team was built around utilizing his skills to the best of its ability. So probably a playoff team, but probably one that will be bounced in the first round or so, I think, unless he makes some moves.
I would love to match up with Indiana in the first round because I could drop a zone on them the entire series and know that I could probably just win 4 games just based off of that.
Yeah, I got one more point to make. Last year, Pacers had a pretty hot run towards the end. I know Winslow was healthy then, but when he was playing Maldo low at point guard / shooting guard, starting a lot of minutes, they're doing really well. I feel like he's the guy that can give them the offensive dynamic option. I mean, he's still young, he's still developing, but he was doing really well. Even this year, he's still shooting some really good percentages. I think that their defense, they have enough defenders to make up his lack of defense, and I think they should give him more minutes. but who knows?
I think he's a great young player. Before I traded him, I put a lot of preference work into him. He's a much better shooter than the draft team said he was. And I honestly feel like he's probably going to end up being a starting guard or a microwave type player off the bench. And they would be better served injecting a bit of offense into their starting lineup.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll see how that plays out and whether he managed to get more minutes as if the team carries on the way they are. So we'll move on to the other team, the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are currently sitting at 7-10. And Josh, we'll obviously hear your views in a minute, but I'm going to allow Gary first shot at this. What are your thoughts on the Cavaliers this year?
I think that just honestly, this team requires a lot of game managing, and Josh always been a good game manager. Every league I play with him, he's really good at strategies and rotations. I just think that he's been going on vacation / getting married and stuff. Just don't have time to put in the work like he usually does. I mean, their big guns are still doing a really good job. You look at Blake Griffin; he's still averaging 22 and 10 on 51% shooting in 31 minutes per game. Kyrie's still dropping his 22, 5 and 4, but shooting percentage is struggling a little bit. I just think that this team has the talent to be a big threat. Just need Josh to be active and get involved, get hands-on with it. I think they're going to bounce back. I think they have the most road games in the league played as well, so they're going to bounce back.
Yeah, I mean, Josh, how dare you have a life outside of CSL? Really, that's what I read it from Gary. But I mean, how's your view on yourself and the Cavaliers this year at 7-10? I mean, surely you guys aren't going to sit around there for very long.
No, I definitely think we're underachieving. As you can see, we've had a lot of small injuries to start the season as well, in addition to currently leading the league in road games. I think I started the season with 3 back-to-backs in a row. But honestly, what our problem is simply just I don't think we're clicking yet. I haven't gotten them back to I started off the season when I did try to go back to the offense I ran with Kyrie when I first got the team, and that just did not work. And I didn't have a lot of time to go in and switch everything back to more of the style that we ran last year. I let some people make some people Kyrie wasn't getting the usage that they thought they should get. So when I started the season, I was intent on trying to get his usage up to around where the Suns had Eric Bledsoe last season, and I've decided scrap that, go back to what you know and what you're good at, and I'm focusing on making sure just Kyrie and Blake shifts where they control the, they get their specific quarters where they're the ones who get the most minutes, and they're in lineup where they're going to get the ball the most. And I actually spent maybe a good almost 2 hours the other day going through each quarter bit by bit and adjusting everything, tweaking it so that it was on the court at all times, kind of like more of what I did last season. So I have pretty high hopes for this next sim that we'll get back to a little bit more, the stability that we had. Because, I mean, about almost 15 wins in a row to end last season, and that was, even with Butler injured. So I feel like we should, be slightly better than we were, even with the slight regression of my players.
Yeah, I mean, I alluded to in the article I put together a couple of weeks ago, I think now. But for me, in my head, when I looked at this, there was 4 things I felt the Cavaliers needed to do this year in order to be a top team. I mean, the obvious is obviously Kyrie and Blake Griffin need to carry on performing at the same level they are. You've got the sort of the reoccurrence of Jimmy Butler back from injury, and I think he'll be huge and massively underrated. He's not going to put up points, but he'll do the bits in between that Gary alluded to earlier, that the bits that you don't necessarily see on the box score. You kind of, I feel, need George DePaula to find his rhythm and find a fit on this team. He's too good to just fade out. So he needs to sort of step up. And then the other thing I'll just mention is you kind of need to get the best out of Dwight Howard in the playoffs. It doesn't necessarily matter in the regular season, but as you mentioned, some of the matchups and things, I mean, he still can do some of the garbage stuff that you need him to do. So, yeah, 7-10, I mean, kind of don't expect you to sort of sit around there. Still probably definitely a block for the playoffs, and it's all about when you get there. So the final team to have a look at in the Central Division is the Milwaukee Bucks, who made some big acquisitions in the offseason just to try and get some talent. Sitting at 3-11, I mean, Josh, do you kind of see anything else for the Bucks this year, or is it back to the lottery?
I think it's definitely back to the lottery, but I mean, I can actually see what he's doing. He's focusing on getting guys who are incredibly tall and long for their positions, and I've actually kind of wanted to see a team built that way. That's kind of the way I would build a team if I was starting from scratch. I would get guys who are uniquely suited for their positions with unique skills, and try to go from there. But I think what he's doing is going to work out for him in the end. I would like to see him do a lot more preference work. I think that he did Don Maker a disservice waiting so long to start his preference work. I think that he would have a part of having those players already developed, so that when a new player comes in, you can really lock in on what you need them to do, because you already have your other players doing what you want to do. So you kind of see where the flaws are and what you need to adjust. So I think that he's slightly behind on his development curve because of that. But no, so far he's not making any bad decisions. He hasn't traded away any assets that I can remember, and he's slowly accumulating things. So I have faith that he's going to have a Denver-like turnaround, because that's going to be the team that I'm looking forward to us talking about later. I feel like Denver is finally starting to slowly turn that corner, and I'm looking forward to talking about that. And yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at.
And I mean, Gary, do you kind of think that the Bucks are back in the lottery this year, but some good signs of development?
Yeah, this team's definitely going to be one of the top 5 picks again, in my opinion. I mean, yeah, they got some like good talent added from free agency, like Jonas Valanciunas and Nerlens Noel, but neither of those guys are going to be huge difference makers. More of good players, good supporting cast players, in my opinion. And thought makers, stat wise, just they're pretty decent, but his shooting percentage is still very ugly due to lack of preference work. I'm starting to wonder if Manu's Thonmaker is so raw, it's going to be a 4 or 5 years project that he just want to kind of lower his value so guys won't vulture him during free agency. That's what I'm thinking. Maybe I'm just going crazy, but because you've seen guys that just get RFAs that either get the price driven up, or guys that just kind of get ignored because the GM's not really taking care of them. Maybe it's just playing possum. I don't know, but you got guys like Brandon Ingram who's going to have a really bright future. Once again, not really a top-notch number 1 guy, but a perfect fit for number 2. I think he's going to stick with what he's doing and trying to make deals that can get him some young assets or picks. This is going to be a long project, but I think he's patient enough to stick with it.
Just to say one thing, going to the positional, I guess, being able to adapt positions and move around. Jason Tatum and Brandon Ingram, a fantastic duo.
I see. Throwing out one set of scouting that we've had so far on Jason Tatum. I love it. So let's move on to the final division in the East, the Southwest. Obviously, well, I say obviously, probably not obviously, because they haven't been at the top before, but the Washington Wizards are at the top of it, with the Heat, the Hawks, the Hornets, and the Magic. So lots of things to talk about here, because this has generally been a competitive division past few seasons. But we'll start with the Wizards, and like I did with the Cavaliers earlier, I'm going to throw it open to Josh first. I mean, the Wizards have made some dramatic off-season changes to try and compete now. Are they up there in the Eastern Conference now?
Yeah, they're my dark horse for getting to the Eastern Conference Finals. I love what he did with the roster. I know that some GMs like Dennis disagree, but I think that the Wizards and the Cavaliers have incredible similar rosters. I think that the way his team is built is almost the same style of play that I envision when I look at my roster. So I kind of see what he has going there, and I'm looking forward to matching up to you in the playoffs. I think we're going to see each other in the playoffs, and that's going to be a good
Yeah, I mean it's been a dramatic off-season, lots of changes. I mean, Gary, you're at 10-5 now. You must be pleased with the direction of travel for the Wizards.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I said, this is definitely first time in this league. It feels weird actually to be leading the division, but I think it's still a pretty small sample size in my opinion. In the beginning of the season, we kind of struggling trying to find our rhythm, but I think I'm starting to get a hold of how to manage this team in rotation and strategy wise, and we've been doing pretty well recently. So I hope we can keep it up. Like I said, it's going to be a tough, playoffs run. I expect us to make the playoffs for sure. But yeah, it's going to be tough for sure.
Yeah, I mean, is this the end of the all point guard lineup dream that you had in the NLL? Is this officially the death of it?
Hey, you never know. I mean, I can always go back to that way in a few years. But right now, I'm just trying to enjoy this competitive roster and see if how far can I go. Like I said, I definitely want to try to go as deep as I can. Our goal is to at least win the division. Miami is always a tough pain in the butt, but I think we can do it this year.
One thing I love about your team is that you can play two different styles of ball. Like you can play the traditional, I'm going to punch you in the mouth and like Cleveland plays, but with Kyle Anderson in your roster, you have the ability to do Gary ball and go incredibly small and just put up a ton of points. So you're going to be well served in the playoffs with that type of versatility.
Yeah, that's what I'm shooting for, is a lot of versatility, because I know a lot of good GMs like you and John likes to run crazy lineups and different rotations. Just got to be prepared for that. So I got a lot of versatile pieces that I can throw around. Hopefully can keep up with you guys. So.
Yeah, I'll just throw in there that I think the best thing that ever happened to the Washington Wizards was that they managed to pick up Milos Teodosic in the pick 3. Not this draft before, because he's been a revelation for you and has kind of spurred you onto this aggressive behaviour to try and become one of the better teams in the East. And we'll certainly see how it pans out this year. And I certainly have you as my vote for the top of the Southeast Division this year. So the other team that probably should have taken Teodosic but didn't for different reasons, the Miami Heat are currently sitting just behind you at 7-5. Are you worried about them, Gary?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Silo is always pretty good at strategizing and maximizing his guys, even though we kind of questionable draft decisions. But offensively, they always know how. They have a bunch of guys that are very versatile, like Ben Simmons, Hamilton, and all those guys can play multiple positions. And they all got height and size. And then Joshua Smith, I think, is very underrated. That guy is a beast down low. I'm surprised he doesn't give him more minutes, because he's hard to game plan, but he can draw fouls. He's one of those weird big men who can steal the ball from you, can rebound, shoot efficiently. He should be playing more minutes, to be honest. So.
Yeah, I mean, Josh, what are your views on the Heat? Are they a playoff team now?
I think that as much as it pains me to say, I think that they are a team that could win. Almost, I don't want to say intentionally underachieving, but they kind of feel. If he's not even playing Damian Lillard great minutes right now. Rumor is he's already traded Lillard, man. He's a point guard. I think we all pretty much agree that team pretty much a point guard away from being one of the highly competitive teams in the East. So I'm kind of left wondering what exactly he's trying to accomplish. But he's kind of gotten drunk on draft power and just accumulating assets. He's Danny Ainge before Danny Ainge learned how to actually take all of his assets and do something with them. This is kind of where I feel like Miami is right now. So it'll be interesting to see if he can actually just say, but I have one of the young league. I'm trying to make him a long-time, championship winner instead of just accumulating assets.
Yep. Him and Dennis are very similar. It just seems like they want to accumulate more and more young talent / picks. It's just like they're Thanos and just want to take all the Infinity Stones. That's draft picks for them. So.
Yeah, it's like it's like a game of eventually you have to cash in. Eventually you have to put your chips in the middle of the table and let the pieces fall where they may. And whenever one of them decides to do that, I think that they'll really step up and maybe even overtake Detroit for Eastern powerhouse.
Yep, agree.
Yeah, an interesting team, Miami, and it's almost like I want to say it's like fool's gold with the accumulation of draft picks and young players, because as you guys alluded to, at some point it has to materialize. If it doesn't, then what's the point? So moving on to the Atlanta Hawks, a team again who've made drastic changes this offseason, and kind of finally got a stable GM, but made a different change in direction and tried to compete a little bit more now. Gary, how do you think this is going to play out for them this year?
The Hawks, I mean, that was a really aggressive move. You don't often see it from teams that are rebuilding to get Dante Exum. Dante Exum is arguably one of the top 5-10 young players in the prime players in the league. The Hawks GM, I feel like, has done a pretty good job also acquiring Hassan Whiteside. But I think that in the process, maybe they rushed. Unlike Miami, I think they rushed it a little too fast, should I say. So right now the team's kind of thin and lack other assets to complement guys like Exum and Whiteside. I think those are the type of moves that Miami and Boston should be making instead, because Hawks is still pretty thin besides those two guys. And right now they're off to a good start, but we all know Exum has been having a lot of injury problems since his Utah days. And I don't know, it's very risky. It could pay off, it could not. But right now I just think that it's a lot of risk that they're taking.
Yeah, I agree with Gary completely. I think that I just really did not like their trade with Detroit. And I think a lot of the older teams, we were told we were being overreactionary, but I think that that's being proven by Detroit's 13-2 record, that he got the talent that he needed in that deal. You know, it better served his team than Atlanta's. I feel like Atlanta is playing with a degree of impatience that they just didn't want to sit on their laurels and, you know, take the traditional route towards making the team stronger. And I think that jumping the gun has slowed down what they could have accomplished, if that makes sense. I think that they're on a good path, and in their attempt to accelerate their curve, they actually slowed it down. I don't think it's preferable. I think that they get better. They have first round pick this year and a ton of second round picks. Some of those people who actually does think second round picks are valuable. They're really good players in the second round. So anyone who wants to be second round picks, I'm here for you. I think that you know, Atlanta just needs to slow down. And you know, one of the things that I did when I first took over Cleveland, I made a list of assets. I made a list of assets that I was going to keep no matter what, and I've stuck to that. I have not moved those players well, with the exception of Stokes. I did say I was going to hold on to Stokes, and I still kind of regret losing him. But other than that, I've held on to those core pieces that I thought, you know, would age well, because I'm one of those guys that I like it so that, you know, my older players eventually age to the bench and they become the depth for the new young guys. And you know, Atlanta will get there eventually.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've been unlucky with the Exum injury. I think if they'd have kept him, they probably would have been a comfortable playoff team, like a 5th seed or something. But no one really near them. But it's a little bit tough for them now. I mean, they've still got talent on that team, so we'll see how it goes. But they have my favorite CSL player of all time in Sam Decker, Mr. Average at everything. So fantastic to see him still getting paid good money and doing his average thing. Although he's taken a bit of a drop off in his shooting this year, but I'm sure Mr. Average will be back to his normal things over the next couple of games. So we'll just flick back here to the other teams in the division.
Sorry, I'm back.
Hello, welcome back.
Yeah, connection got dropped. Sorry.
No problem. Is your dog back with us?
Yep.
that was a disappointing yep, but okay, good. So the other team we're sort of jumping onto now is the Charlotte Hornets, who, correct me if I'm wrong, but have made a couple of interesting moves this year, but are kind of building around the likes of Chris Dunn and Korkmaz as the sort of building pieces. Are they good enough for the playoffs, Josh?
I think they're maybe one or two moves away. I think that they have a long shot at making the playoffs, but I'm really really fond of Chris Dunn. I think that Chris Dunn is one of the more underrated young guards in the league, and that if his team was healthy right now, he'd probably have 2 more wins, and we'd be talking about, oh my God, will they actually be an 8 or a 7 seed this season? So I don't know. They're one of the teams that I haven't really paid all that much attention to because there's just not a lot of talk around them. But looking at their roster now, I think they definitely have the pieces where they could fight for an 8 seed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. So like you said, I think this is one of the teams I don't really follow much in the league, mainly because they've just had so many GM changes recently, and it's kind of I didn't even know who was on their roster until we flicked onto it now. But yeah, probably not a playoff team, probably fighting for that 8th seed. I mean, Gary, have you got anything you kind of want to add about the Charlotte Hornets?
I think they're gonna barely miss out the playoffs this year. I just feel that this team lacks some depth on. As good as Chris Dunn is, he's still growing. He still needs some time to grow a little bit more. And same with guys like Furkan Korkmaz and stuff like that. They have a pretty decent big man rotation, but I think losing Jonas Valanciunas via free agency was pretty big, as I felt that he was doing really well for them down low. And missing him, it's a huge hit on their post offense. As right now, they got to rely on Enes Kanter, who's doing an admirable job. But I always feel he's one of those guys that kind of just pad stats, but don't really win you games. So I just think that this team has a really weird mix, and I don't think it's gonna pan out in the end. They're gonna need to make some moves to either go for the future or consolidate and go for a bigger gun pair next to Chris Dunn.
I hope he does preference work on Vonleh. Like, will someone finally do preference work on Noah Vonleh? He has great ratings, and everyone picks him up on minimum contracts, and no one puts in any work on him. Eventually, it's going to
Yeah, I mean, he's not quite on a minimum contract anymore, but I think that's exactly what the GM was planning to do, trying to pick him up on a deal. Probably, if he gets preference work, will be worth that $10 million, but certainly at the moment he's not worth it. So yeah, we'll see how that develops. So the final team in the East and the final team in the Southeast Division at the moment, who sounds like I'm saying this to every team, but again have gone through some dramatic changes over the past season or so, moving Paul George away and trying to go a little bit younger, and we had him on the podcast a couple of months ago now, probably talking about some of his thoughts around the moves here. But at 5-10, do you guys think that this Magic team is underachieving at the moment without Drummond?
I don't think it's Drummond's fault. I think they're dramatically underachieving because Willie's not playing the players where they need to be played. I mean, why is Andrew Wiggins playing point guard? Why is P.J. Tucker even in the starting lineup? Why is Kevin Seraphin getting for 20 minutes a game? Like, put your best players in the starting lineup and go from there. Chris should be starting. Wiggins should be small forward. Covington should be playing a do-all role, moving around the lineup, being a lockdown guy who does a little bit of everything. Like, I think he needs to be a bit more conventional, and if that would work for him.
Did you share with that idea around the Magic being conventional, Gary?
Yeah, I just think that maybe really just trying different things. I'm not sure, but this is kind of weird. I was pointed out in the chat a couple of days ago that why is Andrew Wiggins running point guard and then a fat boy PJ Tucker playing shooting guard? Just asking people to drive on you nonstop. I think this team has some good talent on paper, but they're still a couple of moves away from being back in the relevance because Drummond's hurt. Embiid's a very, very solid big man, but he also got some big weaknesses, unlike his real life counterpart. And Wiggins is a good two-way player, but I just feel like this team lacks other supporting cast. I mean, Covington, I know he loves, and he's always a solid player. But he's not going to be the guy that's going to take you to the next level. And never been a big fan of Tyler Ennis as a starting point guard. I think he's okay. He's serviceable, but his defense is a big liability in my opinion. And I just think this team's going to need some work to stick with either go for contention now or rebuild completely.
They should move a few of these pieces for a better quality starting point guard, and that would so Wiggins has to never see that position again.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think he kind of envisioned that possibly with Knight, and he obviously when I spoke to Willie, he felt that Ennis was the guy to take them forward, and obviously it's not the case anymore. So yeah, definitely need a point guard, but when they get Drummond back, I fully expect them to be competing for a playoff spot because Drummond has that sort of impact. So let's move on. We've had a chat about some of the different divisions here. Let's have a chat about some of the contenders in the East, or some of the the wild cards who you think could cause an upset here. But obviously, the first one we have to talk about is Detroit. Obviously, are they light years ahead of everyone? We kind of talked about on the Western Conference, the Suns and the Kings being that far ahead of most of the teams in the West. Do you guys feel that's the same thing with the Pistons in the East?
I really like the Pistons. I think they're a great team. I think that Kemba is the league MVP and that they could definitely win the championship. But I playoffs because I feel like winning in the regular season with that team is different than in the playoffs. He has a lot of players that, and in the 7-game series, when a team can actually sit there and focus on your team and concentrate and focus on just making Kemba the worst Kemba that they can be and making everyone else in the roster beat you. I think that then we'll see what Detroit's really made out of, because I think right now they're just overwhelming teams with their with Mario's ability to score up to 30 and Kemba's ability to get you 20 and then keep the other player from even hitting double digits. I think that's what they're living and dying on right now, which is more than most teams have.
Yep.
What about you guys?
Personally, I think the Pistons are going to be one of the top teams as usual. But I think the biggest factor, like you said, come to playoffs is that you got a lot of young guys. One of those GMs that if you have experience kind of plays a factor to the players himself in the game. And a lot of young guys like Jamal Murray and Mario Hezonja hasn't really experienced as much playoff as their past roster has. So I think in playoff-wise, they may be a little bit easier, I guess, to game plan compared to the past. But they still got the Kemba factor. So please, somebody from the West or somebody, just take him away, trade for him, so I don't have to deal with him in the playoffs. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, from an outsider looking in, I didn't expect the Pistons to have such an electric start that they have had. When I look at some of the guys on that roster, they're not the type of guys that I would normally go for. So interesting to see it's working out for them. But like you guys mentioned, playoff time could be a completely different matter if they're playing against some of the talent in the East. So looking at sort of the guys below that, I mean, we've obviously got you guys there, the Wizards and the Cavaliers. Do you both feel that you're kind of sitting in that second tier with your teams?
Yeah, I feel like my team's kind of is a matchup team that once the playoffs start, I kind of over time have gotten an idea of what every guy can do and what he works best with. Like I know I've got a great idea of how to use Dwight. It's how I've managed to knock Boston out the playoffs a few times. I discovered a really great exploit with him and Kyrie and Blake, and it definitely works to my advantage on a few teams. The only team that it didn't really work well is Toronto, because they hit the three at such a high rate that if you can't match that, you just weren't going to beat them. But I feel like and I feel Washington, Gary's going to chime in about his team in a moment, but I feel like Washington has the players in their roster to match up with any team. They have a team of great specialists. If he's losing because of rebounds, give Tristan Thompson an extra 20 minutes a game. If he's losing because of scoring, start moving Teodosic around from shooting guard to point guard, and let him increase his scoring output. If he's losing because of post defense, put Walter on whoever their best post scorer is, and he'll foul them out with his 80 draw foul. He's got a lot of great pieces there to move around. So I think that while both of our teams are in the second tier, we're both a strong second tier because we can match up to any style of play.
Yeah, and Gary, what are your thoughts on yourself, the Wizards, and on the Cavaliers? Do you feel they're both in that second tier as well?
Yeah, and I would like to add, Boston if he tries. I mean, they have a really talented roster, and Dennis does know how to, maximize his guys. But on to Cavaliers, I think they have something that I don't have. Is they have two potential franchise type of players in Kyrie Irving and Blake Griffin. I mean, when it comes to playoff time, I feel like star power is a huge factor over depth, and because you can play guys much bigger minutes than you do in regular season to avoid injuries. And when you have to deal with 38, 40 minutes of Kyrie and Blake Griffin, that's tough. No matter how much you want to game plan, especially those guys can draw fouls. And you can put any guys you want. I feel like Blake Griffin's still going to drop 20 and 10 on you when he plays 30 to 40 minutes a game. And I do feel like that, yeah, right now I think we can belong in the second tier right behind Detroit. But we got to keep up this, stay injury free, and hopefully our guys will continue to play well together. I do feel confident that this team has lots of versatility and can play any kind of ball, like Josh mentioned. But like I said, I haven't really been to playoffs. I've been to playoffs once last year. I barely took a game in Detroit. So it's still a learning experience for me, so we shall see how it goes.
Yeah, and Gary, you obviously mentioned Boston there as one of the other teams who, quote, if he tried, he could probably upset the Eastern Conference. I mean, open to both of you guys. Out of Detroit, Cleveland, Washington, is there anyone else in that Eastern Conference, obviously including Boston as well, who you think could be a contender or a dark horse?
Honestly, no. I think those are the four teams that are gonna get there. It's gonna be Cleveland, Boston, Detroit, or Washington.
And Gary, is there anyone else you want to throw into the mix?
If Sixers actually have TJ will actually be active like us, then yeah, they have a chance. But I doubt that will happen. So it's good. Like Josh, I agree with the same four teams right there, with Boston and Boston being the real dark horse because we just don't know what Dennis is gonna do. He might actually try because someone trash talk him, or he might just stick with the plan and kind of phase it out and trying to get more future assets. So.
Yeah, when Philly commits to GMing for an entire season, then I'll commit to putting them in their proper positioning.
Yeah, I mean, rumors are that Boston are actively looking for a star player, so we'll see how that turns out. So moving away from contenders and the playoffs and division matchups, etc., looking towards the bottom end of the Eastern Conference, which teams are definitely no hope in hell's chance of making the playoffs? Better off looking at the lottery.
Well, we talked about the Bucks. You're right. Only one round of scouting, but I'm just going off of the style of play that Purdue likes to play, and the fact that he needs surefire hits in the draft. I really see him if he gets another top 3 pick. Jason Tatum is going to be an incredible player. I feel like that's not even a limb to go out on. I think that he's going to be one of the top 3 players in the draft. And at 6'9", with the ability to shoot, dribble, score on all 3 levels, and defend, that's basically our league's next Kobe. So he in 2 drafts could literally draft himself a Jordan Pippen duo. The Brandon Ingram, I can do everything and lock down your best player, and the Michael Jordan, I can lock down your best player, but I'm really here to get you to drop 30 on you every game. So I think that'll go a long way towards the resurgence in Milwaukee.
Yeah, you heard it here first, guys. Michael Jordan's coming back to the CSL in the form of Jason Tatum. Gary, I mean, the Bucks. Yeah, well, yeah. Gary, do you feel the same way about the Bucks? Obviously, probably not going to be a playoff team. Better off looking off to the lottery for next year.
Yeah, I know Manu feels different. I read his comments. He feels that he should be around 500, but I just don't see it. This team's still a long ways to go. When you have David Stockton as your starting point guard, it's hard to win games. That guy gives up 30 points mediocre scores. Like, just period.
Yeah.
He's just bad defender. I mean, he's a decent shooter and decent playmaker, but his defense is too bad. Anyways, yeah, I think they're gonna be one of the top lottery teams, and they need another talent to be next to Brandon Ingram, because I just don't think that Ingram is the ultimate number one guy. He's more of a high end number two, a Scottie Pippen to a Michael Jordan. So, hey, maybe Jason Tatum is the Michael Jordan for him. So.
Hey, fingers crossed it works out for the Bucks. So the other team that I've got penciled down as a lottery team, but a lottery team with no pick is the New York Knicks. Josh, what are your views on the Knicks and the direction they're going?
I agree with you. I don't dislike what he's doing, though. I think that going out there and playing your best and trying to win games will serve him well, because he's going to have a lot of players with elevated stats. And if I was him, I would be pumping out articles every day about how great these players are, and maybe for whatever I can possibly get for them, because he needs to start creating assets at a faster pace than he currently is. If he can do that, I think we'll see the Knicks come back a little sooner, because it's just hard to be that level of team and not have your own first round pick. And I know that kind of just most GMs, when they don't have their first round pick, their goal is to make that pick as good as they possibly can. I mean, as bad as they possibly can for the other team, but that doesn't really serve you any good. You should be focused on what you have going on on your team, and just trying to put them in the best position to better in the future. Because I mean, even if the Knicks, say the Knicks were a 500 team this season, how does that help them? They're not going to beat Detroit. They're not going to beat Washington. They're not going to beat any of those elite teams. So just focus on what you got.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in here and just ask you guys. I mean, perhaps we'll ask Gary this question, but you can see who I've got up on the screen. James Young. He was the guy who was traded, brought into the New York Knicks for that first round pick. Do you feel that was a good move by the Knicks management?
Yeah, looking back, no, not so much. I mean, James Young has always been a pretty solid player. I feel like he was one of those top 6 man, I believe, when he was playing with Detroit. He's always been a good slasher. He's a pretty good foul drawer and stuff like that. But he's not a guy that you want to risk your number one pick on. I mean, he's not a franchise. Like Josh said, he's not a franchise player. Like, he's just more of a good supporting player, potential 6 man a year kind of player. Like, it's like throwing a first round number one pick at let's say Bogdan. I would never do that. So it just, to me, that's for the love of God, Knicks, just win as many games as you can, because Doug has that pick this year. The last one we need is Phoenix to get another top player on a roster that's 15 deep.
Well, Phoenix could pick up the Mr. Michael Jordan, future player. Can you imagine that as number one? I think that would be the time the league folded. I think if that happened, but yeah, I mean, is there any other teams that you think probably going to be lottery teams this year, not worth looking at in terms of playoff prospects?
Maybe Charlotte or Orlando. Sorry, Orlando. Maybe Orlando.
Even if they get Drummond back.
And they're hard to
go
place
ahead,
Yeah, I mean, for myself, I think the Bucks and the Knicks are penciled in definitely for the lottery. I think when you compare the East to the West, I think there's so many teams that are in that sort of middle pack that could be a 0.500 team and make the 7th or 8th seed in the East. And that's where it's really competitive. When you compare the conferences, and if you look at the West, it's generally top heavy.
Yep.
So yeah, it's going to certainly be an interesting season. As I asked the other guys on the Western Conference episode a couple of days ago, which team do you think is going to come out of the Eastern Conference this year? And you cannot say your own.
I guess I'll go first. I say come out of the East. I'm gonna say Cavaliers, man. Like I said, I penciled in my prediction.
You can't say each other's teams. Come on, guys.
Fine.
that is not fun. Pick a team.
Go ahead.
I'll say Detroit. I think that, again, Kemba is in a league of his own. He Kemba gets you 3 steals a game and about 20 points, no matter what.
Yes, I think Josh is breaking up on there, but he's saying Detroit because of Kemba, I think.
He has potential some games get you even 10 assists. He's the golden standard of point guards in this league.
Yeah, Kemba's the league MVP, and obviously Josh sees the Pistons coming out. I mean, Gary, do you agree with that, or do you see another team?
Yeah, if we can't pick him, I'm just gonna go with Detroit as well. John's got experience. He's been to like literally every single finals, I believe, or maybe conference finals. I don't remember, but something ridiculous. But I should expect him to be at least in the conference finals once again. The team's deep. They got a really good big man rotation. They got Kemba, the cheat code Walker, and they also got 2 really young up and coming pieces in Hasonia and Jamal Murray. So, yeah, man, the team's gonna be tough to beat. Lots of versatility and depth, and Kemba. So, Detroit.
Yeah, I mean it's certainly tough to not pick Detroit in this situation, but just to add a bit of flavour, I'm going to add a different team for some different reasons, really. For me, I think that if things pan out, and you guys mentioned if the Celtics actually decide to get it together and actually compete this year, and if they manage to get a particular franchise player that they're rumored to be getting a really good deal, then that team could become the best team in the Eastern Conference overnight. So we'll see how it pans out. Lots of things to look forward to this year in the East. Lots of different ways it could go, really, in terms of that playoff seeding. So it's going to certainly be fun to watch, and it'll be interesting to see how the Wizards do this year, and the Cavaliers, to see how those styles do, and how you guys perform in the playoffs, as that's where it matters. So it's been great to have you both on. Thanks for coming on, Gary. Thanks for coming on, Josh. Best of luck with the season.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, and please, somebody trade Kemba. Western teams, anybody, take Kemba away. We need him to be gone. So
I'm done to fall in love with the glorious George DePaula, and let's work out a deal for DePaula and whatever you want for Kemba.
Yeah, you've heard it here first. Get Kemba out of the Eastern Conference quickly, please. That's a cry of help from 2 Eastern Conference GMs.
Yeah, Chris, use your pieces.
It's great to have you guys on. I'm sure the season will be interesting.
Thank you.